I'm Terry Mumford, and Kaz Margano is the co-host for tonight. Our topic is civics for change, and our focus is going to be on being the most effective communicator you can be with policymakers, elected policymakers, appointed policymakers, the people who are making decisions that are in your area or that are important to you. Because we do have a fair number of people on the call tonight, 50 plus, we'll keep things muted, and then at the end we'll have some time for questions and answers, and then you can unmute then. And I see a lot of you have already started introducing yourselves in the chat. What are you from? What organization are you with? And if this is your first session, let us know. You can put questions or requests in the chat, and Kaz can follow up on some of them or just save them until the end. We will be done in an hour, but it'll take some time. It'll take some work to get through there, so that we have to hold the Q&A till the end. And then at the end, you can you can raise your hand and we can unmute you for questions. And you all are very experienced at this, so you know how to do it on your computer or on your phone. This program is put on by Building Bridges for America. It's our purpose is to support grassroots organizers, candidates, and causes. Building Bridges for America was begun by folks who had been heavily involved in the Buttigieg campaign, and they wanted to make sure that the training and experiences that they had were passed on to organizers and volunteers in the future. And this training program is a key part of what Building Bridges for America is about. This slide shows the mission, values, and vision of Building Bridges for America. And this particular training is, I think, over there in the vision part, where we're working to achieve an engaged and informed electorate. This program tonight is Civics for Change. It's over on the side there. It's one of 2 civics programs, and there are 8 training sessions in total. This is number 6. We have yet remaining conversations that break through and training for local leaders and precinct chairs. We're just about to wrap up that second summer session. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll have just a 4-part training program that is focused around get out the vote in anticipation of the November election. So we'll hope that you'll finish out this set of 8 and then enjoy that break, and then come back and we'll all focus together on getting out the vote. Our plan is then to, after the election, we'll take even a longer break and then start up with training again in January of next year. If you go to our website, you can download the workbook that goes along with this program, and you can also access the slides, and there will be a recording of the session that'll probably be posted in the next few days. Just to say a couple of words about myself. I am retired. I'm a retired lawyer. I spent my career in and around government. I was a lobbyist. I worked at Indiana University. I worked at the Indiana Legislative Services Agency. I worked in the governor's office and with the speaker. My experience has made me optimistic. But it makes me realize the value of learning how to be effective, because I saw folks who were very, very passionate come to the State House, come to the governor, come to their legislator, and not have the impact they wanted to have because they hadn't had the training or they didn't have the experience in being an effective communicator. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. How can we effectively reach out to our policymakers? And this topic is, this training session is different than most of our other training sessions, because most of our other training sessions are seeking to make us better at voter contact, better at reaching our friends and relatives, or just even making those cold contacts that will get people to be our supporters. This training is about reaching out to policymakers, and so that we can express our opinion to those folks who are going to make decisions that affect us and our states and our nation. This presentation is probably for the more experienced organizer and advocate, someone who has been perhaps doing this but wants to hone their skills and focus on some specific ways to persuade policymakers. And this is a presentation for optimists, those of us who believe that we can make a difference, that we can make politics and government better. So why is it, or why do you think that that people are not reaching out to their policymakers to express their opinion? What is it that is keeping, literally millions of people from contacting the mayor, their senator? So if you just give us your thoughts in the chat, and Kaz will pull those out for us.
Yeah, well, I started off with being in Indiana, I just don't feel like my elected leaders, especially at the state and then our federal level, will listen to me. And then Myra says too much cynicism. People might have too much cynicism. Catherine says people are unsure what to say and do not have the research results that will support their viewpoint and share. They may not know where to get that information. Jean says people may not be paying attention. That's very true. Soja says they don't think they will make a difference. And Melissa says they've gotten complacent with how things are and they think they won't be heard. Wow. Dr. Stephanie says they don't think they know enough to speak on their level. I like.
Cool. That's cool.
She says they be heard. They don't know how. Beth says they don't know how. So yeah, we're getting a lot of good things that I know we're going to be addressing.
Right. And that list is an even better list than I think a more complete list than what we have here. And this on this slide is the result of in fact a survey of why people don't reach out. And it's very, I think that the answers that you all gave are more complete. But I think one of them is the idea of unsureness, that something's going wrong. They know something's going wrong. A person knows something's going wrong, but they don't know where you would go to fix that. They don't know how to reach the right person. They don't know what to say. And I love the comment in there that people are concerned that you're supposed to say things a certain way, that unless you know the secret language of politics, you're not supposed to contact your legislator. And that's really not true. And if they think, and people think it doesn't matter, and we're going to talk about how it does matter. And I think this quote from Alice Walker is something that we all probably believe in, and that is that we give up our power by thinking that we don't have any. And if we come from the position of knowing that we have power, we will then give ourselves power and we'll be able to express ourselves in a way that is effective. And we also want to make sure that our elected officials or appointed officials know what we're thinking. And there is no way for them to know what we're thinking unless we tell them. And in a more colloquial sense is that you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. And similarly, you can't communicate with your elected officials unless you in fact let them know. You send them an email, you write them a letter, you get in touch with them. So the work tonight is to start with the basics, just to get us on the same page, and we'll have some materials that we're going to look at that are from the workbook that goes with the course. There is a workbook online, and it's very straightforward. It has blanks to fill in. It has almost like exercises to do. We've had folks who've been on the training before say that they used it for like their Democrat club, or they used it for a group who was just getting started, a grassroots group. And so I do recommend the workbook to you. After we talk about the basics, then we're going to talk about, how do you narrow your focus? Because there's a whole lot going on. And any one of us could probably spend time on, I don't know, a dozen issues or maybe more. But we want to talk about how we're going to narrow our focus, because if we're going to be writing letters, or if we're going to be making phone calls, we need to narrow that, need to focus on a few issues, and then learn how to communicate effectively about those issues. And the other thing that is in the background is we are, through this direct communication, we are turning polls into action. Because there's a question that we may all have, that if a poll is saying that this particular policy position is very, very popular, or this particular policy position is very unpopular, why aren't elected officials following the polls? Why is that? Why isn't that enough? Well, it's because for an elected official or an appointed official, they may see the poll, they may read the poll, but they haven't heard from their constituents. And as frustrating as that may be, that's probably how it should work. That my state representative should be more concerned about my views and other constituents' views than she is about the polls. So we are going to focus in this training on how we have that direct contact, so we can turn polls into action in that way. And also when we're together like this, all 70 of us, there's probably a variety of roles that you all assume. Some of us are super volunteers. This is my terminology. Our super volunteers. You are, leaders in a particular campaign. You might be helping write policy. You will be recruiting volunteers for a campaign or for a particular organization. You might just be a volunteer, and that's most of us. You're doing phone banking and canvassing, and you're writing postcards, and you're passing out yard signs, and you're doing lit drops. And then I didn't even have tabling on here, my favorite thing. But or I hope all of us are trusted voices for our friends, our families, our colleagues, they look to us to give them good advice because we understand civics. We understand what's going on, and we can help them be good communicators. And then all of us are concerned citizens, and we are all taking the responsibility of being communicators with policymakers. If you weren't here a few weeks ago, we did do a training called Civics 101 on the basics of our Constitution and our federal and state legislation. So if that's something that would be helpful to you or a group that you belong to, you can go to the website and download that. And there's also, with that, there's slides, and there's a workbook, and there's a recording of the presentation. So we're going to start now and talk about what's in the workbook and what you have in there that can help you get started. And one of the key reasons that we start with these worksheets is that it has been my experience and the experience of other people who are, good communicators, is that we have to know who we should be talking to, and we need to know what's the relevant, we could call it jurisdiction. So we need to identify for ourselves whether what we're talking about is an issue that affects the whole state. Is it an issue are we concerned about an issue that's just within our county or our city? Is it a school district issue? Is it a library issue? We need to start there, because when we were talking about what keeps people from communicating, we all saw that one of the problems is we don't know sort of what's the cause of our problem, what's the extent of our problem. So in the workbook, the first thing you do is focus on what's the extent, what's the geographical area that I'm concerned with. And then the next thing that we want to know is, well, if we've decided it's a federal issue, then we need to identify who are our US senators, and I need to know who was my US representative, my one. If it's a state issue, I need to be thinking about the governor. Who is my state senator? Who's my state representative? If it's a local issue, is it a city issue? Is it a county issue? Is it a school issue? And by going through those two steps, I'll know for myself or for a group that I'm working with, what's the geographical area and who is the responsible policymaker or policymakers for that area. And for 2023 and beyond, we have other policymakers we want to be concerned with: the Secretary of State, the Treasurer of State, Attorney General, CFO at the local level, judges, township trustee, advisory board. So as if for yourself and for a group that you are perhaps the super volunteer for, make sure you have identified at this very fundamental level this concept of jurisdiction and who are the important policymakers. Because you want to make sure that you have the correct information, because if you do not have the correct information, then it will be very easy for a policymaker to just dismiss what you have, this incredibly marvelous letter that you prepared. It can easily and maybe even appropriately be dismissed if you're writing to the wrong person about the wrong jurisdiction. So after we've gotten through those steps of, you have a problem, you've decided what is the geographical or the subject matter jurisdiction, you've identified who is the person or group of people that you want to communicate with, then we start identifying the issue and just learning how to describe it. And one of the suggestions from the workbook is that you, from the outset, identify the issues that you are going to be focusing on. Just perhaps a couple of issues. The examples are something that's, if you can focus on something that's very immediate to you, something that is affecting your ability to get to work because the roads are terrible, or you're concerned about the educational system in your area, you're concerned about voting rights. But one of the goals of this issue identification sheet is to let you pick what is important to you. There's this new, well, it's not a new term, but it's a term that's used a lot about, can something be scaled? Meaning, is something that we're doing, can we make it big enough? Well, what we want to do in this training is let you take something that's important to you and make it big, or make it, quote, little. You can make something that you can be focused on something which is national in scope, or you can be focused quite appropriately on something that is very local to you. For example, your library board. Is that what is happening at your library that is of concern to you? And the directions and help that we're giving you here, we should be useful. We hope it's useful, regardless of the level of the focus that you have. On these issue identification sheets, we also ask you to consider if there are other organizations that are working on your same issues. That old saw about, you don't want to reinvent the wheel is so true, and it goes right along with their strength in numbers. So from the very beginning, when you identify something that you are interested in, or that your group is interested in, right away ask yourself, who else is working on this issue? Can we work with them? And how will we reach out to them? And also from the very beginning, start to think of how you want to describe consistently and positively your issue, because we want to take some of the lessons we've learned in some of the other trainings and always be focusing on our issue in a way that puts it ahead of the concerns we have with people who have a different point of view. So let's put those things together. Let's put together, who's in charge, what's the best way to explain the issue that you're concerned with, and what's the best way to make your views known. So let's start with that. We have a sheet in the workbook that asks you to do that for your issue or issues. And if you can keep that in mind as you're going through whatever, as you're focusing on whether it's a national issue or your local library, keep these questions in mind so that you are effective in your communication. When we're talking about the identifying and framing and formulating the issue, we're talking about how will we describe our concerns? How will we describe our viewpoint? How will we describe what our goals are? If you are that super volunteer, you're at an organizational level, you may be tasked with developing your organization's summary of the issues and position. And in those summaries, you'll be talking about what's your purpose, what's your goals, and how will you achieve those goals. And you will probably be working with other organizations to share resources. And then for your members, for the members of your group, for the members of the campaign, you will, as the super volunteer, you will be assisting other volunteers in developing communications. You may be doing a letter writing campaign, an email writing campaign, and you will be developing the uniform and consistent explanation. You'll be suggesting frames for issues, and you'll be encouraging the other volunteers to use their personal stories. And so here are some tips we suggest for you to use for yourself, but also for others who are relying on you for good advice. And, start out with the explanation of why you personally are concerned, and identify the issue positively. Frame the issue around your values. Is your concern based on your belief in freedom? Is your concern based on your belief in fairness? And then state how you are affected personally, and then ask for specific action. When you are thinking of ways to make your views known, again, if you're the super volunteer at that organizational level, you may be having direct interactions with policymakers. You may be sharing policy statements. You will be looking for opportunities to speak in person. You will be organizing the sending of emails, the writing of letters. And then you will be also helping the members of your group deliver their communications. And then you'll be helping, you will develop specific recommendations on where and how to communicate. On this point, I was talking to a friend who was working with a group of parents who are concerned about the library in this area and in her area. And she was taking the initiative on that very point to make sure that she had pulled together the email addresses for the library board, the snail mail addresses for the library board, the schedule of meetings for the library board. So as the super volunteer, or just the volunteer who has agreed to pull this information together, those practical bits of information are so important. And you want to consider all the options that you have for communicating with the policymaker. Making phone calls, be prepared to speak to a live person or leave a voicemail. And if you're like me, in order to do that, I have to, before the call, write down and rehearse what I'm going to say. I'll tell my husband, you're going to wonder who I'm talking to, but I'm just in here rehearsing what I'm going to say. Send the email and letter, the postcard. For the U.S. senators and U.S. representatives, they have, in essence, email forms on their websites. And so that's what I do to talk to my U.S. senators and my U.S. representative. I go to their websites and use their forms to let them know what I'm thinking. If you want to write them, always a good idea. Postcards are delivered more quickly in DC. Longer letters can be sent to the district offices. I personally try to avoid form letters or postcards, or if that's what's supposed to be done, I will personalize them if I can, just literally writing some of my own personal notes. Consider writing an op-ed for a local paper or a trade publication or blog. And in that op-ed, be sure you mention the policymaker by name. And then consider speaking in person at a public meeting and town hall. And on that latter point, again, something I was just talking with my friend about is that if you are intending to speak at a public meeting, check that there is an agenda item that would relate to what you wanted to speak on. I mean, any member of the public can go to a public meeting and listen. But if you want to be able to speak on a topic, in most states, that topic would have to be on the agenda, and there would have to be an opportunity for public comment on the agenda. So in the workbook, there's an example of how this is pulled together. The example that is here is on federal voting rights, but there are other examples that are for state level issues and local government issues. So if we're trying to use our civics knowledge for change, our mantra is to be present, be positive, and be repetitive. In our representative democracy, our policymakers need to hear from their constituents, and we don't want to allow policymakers to only hear one point of view. The facts do not speak for themselves. It's up to you to explain your why, your values, your reasons for concerns. And there's only so much time you have to get your point across. So my advice would be to don't demonize the opponents. Let them handle their own issues. Beyond direct testimony, how can you influence policymakers? Reach out to reporters. If you're reading a story, particularly one on a news story, particularly one that's online, there will either always or almost always be a note as to how you can reach the reporter who wrote that story. And I want to assure you that that reporter does want to hear from you, particularly if it's a first person narrative where you are telling that reporter how this situation affects you or your family. We mentioned writing op-eds for local papers. We're going to talk about that again. And then, of course, there's organizing a Facebook group. And we talked last week in our grassroots organization training about using a Facebook page for communication. And then finally, provide that sustained flow. Once is never enough. I've been talking with one of my kids who's out west and is dealing with a particular issue that's causing some concerns out there. And she says, well, I've already put that information out last week. I said, well, then it's perfect. Then do it again this week. Get yourself on if we're talking about an issue that you think is really hot, really crucial, I would say that weekly is about the right time, about the right amount of time for a repetition of your point of view. So let's do this. Let's run through how we would put together a communication. So what are the always rules? What do you always do in every communication? The first one is you start with your name. And I cannot tell you how many times when people send me a letter to look at that it doesn't start with their name. Okay, start with your name and put in whatever street address, etc., you feel comfortable including. And if what you feel comfortable including is just Indianapolis, Indiana, then do that for just so you'll know if you're communicating with your elected officials, they're probably going to have you put in the full address, zip code. And then go ahead and say, please go ahead and say, I am your constituent. And and then you can go on to, if you've had any points of contact, have you voted for this person? Did you see them last week at a town meeting? And then you can say, I want you to do this. And then here are the 3 things I want to say about this. And for those of you who are my age, you remember when they taught us to write every paragraph begin with a topic sentence. This is a time to do that. Every one of your paragraph begins with a topic sentence, and that should mean you'll be summarizing what you're going to tell them later. You want to tell them why this affects you personally. Here's my story. And then summarize and restate your request and express appreciation, and then thank them. So those are the rules of every communication. And here are the rules of what not to say. Never say, I will never vote for you. Never say that they're an idiot, or that they don't care about you, or they hate veterans. Because if you say to an elected official, I will never vote for you, there is no reason for them to read any further, because if you're never going to vote for them, then so not that. And then also, on a more serious note, a couple of suggestions from George Lakoff and one from Barack Obama. When you are arguing against the other side, do not use their language. So if you are writing because you are concerned about a position that is being taken and you want to take the opposite position, take the time to state your position in a way that does not use their words. And if you're trying to debunk a lie, don't repeat it. You will just help strengthen it and spread it. If you are just so overwhelmed about how terrible this lie is, still, please, you will be falling into a trap if you start refuting the lie. And for Barack Obama, don't start with a slogan. As he says, let's start with what is true. So this Barack Obama's point relates back to what I think we were talking about at the very beginning. People are concerned that they don't know the special language that they should be using. Well, you now have permission from Barack Obama not to use any of the special language, not to use any of the slogans. Just start with what is true for you. And so what do you want to talk about? What do you want to write about? So many things. You can choose to focus at that policy level up, that's at the federal, state level. You can focus on something that is in your state only, or in your city only, or in your school district only. All of those are worthy, and there's many others. All of those are worthy things for you to spend your time to write, call, and talk about. And so let's talk about how we might create a strategy, a communication strategy that's on reproductive rights. And I picked reproductive rights because that's something that a lot of folks are interested in. But please don't take away the idea that I think that, that's the level, first of all, that's the only issue you should be focused on, or that this is the level you need to focus on. Focus on what matters to you. But if we're going to have a strategy around reproductive rights, you have a group that wants to focus their attention on that, well, then you start out with, who should I contact? Well, if we're talking about federal legislation, it's only 3 people. It's actually somewhat simple. It's your 2 U.S. senators and your U.S. representative. If it's state legislation, it could be your governor and your state representative and your state senator. So you would use that cheat sheet, and you would, if you're helping a group, make sure that the members of that group know who they should be contacting. And what should I say? Well, we're going to follow those rules we talked about. we're going to everybody's going to give their name, the address that they feel comfortable giving, and they're going to say their constituent. They're going to focus on 3 points. That's all, 3 things. They're going to include a personal story. They're going to include a request for action. And then they're going to figure out where they want to deliver that message. And one thing to point out here is that once you have come up with the perfect communication on in this case, it's reproductive rights, you're going to use that perfect communication as many times as you can. You might use it as the basis of a phone call. You might use it in an email. You might send a snail mail. You might use it in an op-ed. You might use it in person. You might post it to social media. So it makes sense to spend the time developing that really excellent communication and then use it and reuse it in as many venues as you can. And some tips, and that is, here's what, once you have that perfect letter and you've send it to your state representative, then post it on Facebook, post it on X, post it on Threads, put it in Instagram, say, here's what I just sent to my state rep. You might want to do the same thing. If your group wants to do a form letter, great, just modify it. Petitions, probably not enough. And I also would encourage you to communicate with those who support you and those who don't. In Indiana, there are some very brave and wonderful state representatives and state senators who are, during the legislative session, fighting the good fight against a supermajority in each of the 2 houses. And even though I want to, make I want to have folks writing to the Republicans who are doing some of the things I disagree with, I want my wonderful state representative who is fighting the good fight to hear from me, to let her know. I want to let her know how much I appreciate what she's doing. And so I would encourage you to do that. It's also a good way to get started when you want to, send out some of your first communications. Why not write to someone who you think supports you, and just start off on that positive approach. And on the concluding point there is just follow the same approach in written and verbal communications. So here's some sample letters that I might do, or that I have done, on federal legislation dealing with reproductive rights. I have my 2 senators, Senator Todd Young and Senator Mike Braun. I have my Congressman Andre Carson. I find them on their websites, and then I write them and I tell them I'm a constituent, I'm a lifelong Hoosier, and I do have to put my address in there. I'm a wife, mother, and grandmother. I'm 74 years old. And my points are that I'm writing because I am concerned that abortion rights have been damaged after nearly 50 years of protection. And then I work through why I am concerned about that. And that my second point is that having a yes or no system is not something that I personally do not agree with. Other folks would write this point differently, but this is the way I would write it up. And then my third point is I'm concerned about civil rights protection, because the Dobbs decision calls into question other important civil rights. And the action I'm requesting is to preserve the protections that we've had for decades for reproductive rights, and to preserve civil rights that protect individual liberties. In preparing my communications, my letters, there are resources that you could go to for reproductive rights. There's also, if gun safety is a particular issue for you, we haven't talked about that, but I mean, if that's just an example of where you might, that might be something that's big for you. If we're talking about federal or state action. And there's also, if you're interested in other things that the Supreme Court's doing, where you might then be talking to your senator, your congressman about, how to implement or how to respond to what the Supreme Court has done. There's a way for you to do that. In a couple of minutes here, I want to just talk about something of the basics of writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor. And the purpose of doing that is really to use the local media to get your message out. And policymakers and their staff do pay attention to these letters to the editor. A friend of mine who worked at one of the local papers here, who was involved with their editorial board, said that they would spend hours, days, whatever it was, on writing what they thought was just an excellent editorial. And then they would do whatever, I don't know how the research works, but what they would determine is that the editorial that had been written by the editors of the paper was not read as much as each of those of the letters to the editor, or this, the community sounds off type columns. So this stuff does make sense in terms of the place to devote your time. And it's just a good way to get that perfect communication that you have already prepared get it in another forum. So here are the basics. You pick your paper, and that could be, the online paper. It could be a trade journal. You determine whether your paper has a policy on op-eds or LTEs. How do you submit it? Is there a length limit? Even if there is no length limit, if they don't say it, please limit yourself to 300 words. And describe your issue and your views. I once took a communications for like lawyers. It was for lawyers who were trying to write things for lay people to understand. And they said, here's all you need to know. Say 3 things 3 times and stop. So we're taking that and incorporating it into our standards here for writing an op-ed. And so we are also, in this op-ed, we're going to identify ourselves and give some idea of where we live. We're going to have a personal story. That's how we're going to start. And then we're going to say that personal story means that this issue is important to me, but it's also important to the community. And then we're going to request action. What do you want to happen? And who do you want to take action? I was reading a really moving letter to the editor that, again, was one of and it's a situation that my daughter was involved in. And this letter, it was very, very touching. But at the end, it just stopped. It didn't say what should happen next. And I think folks they can disagree with what you say, but they want to know what you're suggesting. So after you have identified yourself, the importance of the issue, why it's so crucial to you as an individual and crucial to the community, then say, what do you want to happen? Who do you want to take action? If it's a vote by a particular person, mention that policymaker by name, because that'll make it easy for Google to find that article. Do you want to invite others to join you in your efforts? Do you have an upcoming event? And then, amplify. If your letter to the editor or op-ed is published, you can post it in social media. You can, send it to your elected officials say, look what I just said in the paper. And and vice versa. You can also, as your letter to the editor, say, I want to share with my fellow and sister residents what I just wrote to the mayor. So as we're wrapping up here, we want to spend time. I think several of these involve spend time. We want to spend time on what's our issue, why is it important, what values of mine are come into play with this issue. I need to be sure I'm writing, communicating with the person who can do something about this, and that person needs to know that I am, I'm out there and I'm involved. And in preparing the message, we want to stay positive, state what we are for and why. And if we're leading a group, we want to coordinate with each other or spend time assisting each other in framing and explaining our point of view. And we want to offer those tips on how to stay positive. And we want to be a little creative. How are we going to put our views out there in a new place? Are we going to talk directly to reporters? Are we going to use social media, op-eds, etc.? And we'll close. Always good to close with an Amanda Gorman quote. There's always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, and if only we are brave enough to be it. And I know we are. So keep track of building bridges. We want to see you again. And